there, gamers and code enthusiasts. Welcome to the Minigame Project series, where I'm mixing some web dev wizardry with a sprinkle of gaming goodness. In this series, I'm rolling up my sleeves to craft a bunch of browser-based minigames using everybody's favorite toolkit, jQuery. So why jQuery, you might be wondering? It's like this trusty sidekick of web development. It simplifies the complex, smooths out cross-browser quirks, and keeps things fun and snappy. So it's been around long enough to where it knows, or rather the internet knows, all the tricks of its trade. You can find tons of videos, courses, content, articles, Stack Overflow posts, Reddit threads, all the above things on it. So it's a great tool, and it's used in like 80 million plus, almost 80 million websites and plugins, mostly thanks to PHP with WordPress, for example, uses a ton of jQuery plugins. So it's still worthwhile to know. And again, with a 4.0 update having hit my radar in 2024, I wanted to make a series with it that broke away from my normal React, some kind of server, some kind of database, full stack, CRUD, MERN apps, all those fun buzzwords. I wanted to build something simple with HTML, JS, and CSS, which this is what it is. So buckle up, join me on this pixel-packed adventure as I build, tweak, and play through different kinds of memory puzzles, logic games, and whatever else I can come up with. So it's going to be one heck of a ride. Let's dive on in. As always, without dilly-dallying too much, you could always go check out the README of this project. Again, any relevant links will be listed in the description down below. So you can find the README, the most up-to-date source of the playlist link and the videos I make in it, any additions I make to the project. It will also have the most up-to-date commits. So if you have found this series in the middle and are interested in a particular part, obviously you can just make your own sandbox project, because I'm keeping it fairly simple. No NPM installs as of now, and all that kind of crazy stuff. So you can just build an HTML, CSS, and JS file from scratch, and minus some styling stuff, probably able to follow along no problem. But you could also come and clone this project at whatever commit you want in the video series to try and follow along with me. So even if you don't know what's going on, I do advise you write along with me and not just copy, paste, or watch only, as there is merit to actually writing this stuff to build up some, new connections in your brain, make those new neurons, make those new connections, and begin at least getting some muscle memory writing some code out. So we're going to pick up where the last video left off, where I had a very simple version of Tic Tac Toe up and running in the browser. I'm super zoomed in, which is why it's appearing so large. So just keep that in mind, why everything doesn't seem super like organized or laid out. I know, but playing the game, it works. I can win in the diagonals, the columns, the rows, and the two diagonals. That's redundant, Luke, you just said that. But I left off the video with the game pretty much done, and I noticed a typo that I actually pinned as a comment in the last video. You'll notice here that I clicked reset. I'm clicking reset, and the banner of game results still says X wins there. I didn't notice that at the end of the last video, and I figured out what it was very quickly because I am a doofus. If we head over to the game.js file, which we'll be doing a lot of work in today, so again, grab that last commit, or go look at the commit at that point in time. I know I have all these things collapsed for now for readability. You can grab that commit or go to my repository in the Covalence the GitHub repository, and grab the code at that previous commit so you can paste it into your own sandbox and get going with me here. But there it is right there. I wrote visibility, which is a typo. It needs to be visibility, and that right there will now have it correctly restart. So there's the draw, restart game, correctly clears it out. Now X wins, clears it out. So there we go. That was an issue, a little typo I had from the previous video. I have it pinned as a comment in the last video, and I hearted my own comment because I'm goofy like that. But yeah, what we're going to do today is we're going to add the potential for some different game modes, because again, I didn't want to just code, what's it called? I didn't want to just code Tic Tac Toe and leave it there, because, well, that is boring, and so I want to make sure that we do some extra things to spice it up a touch. Like, again, like there's tons of folks that can code tic-tac-toe, or have tic-tac-toe in their portfolio, whether they are entry level or like newbie level. But let's kick it up a notch and add some features that aren't in normal tic-tac-toe that will really give us a new way of looking at this. So something I'm going to do here is I'm going to add a couple of buttons up yonder. Well, I'll have like, ooh, that's a bad color for this. Let's do the blue color. So I'm gonna add some buttons up here as the goal in this video series. That'll have kind of like a button group in Bootstrap or Tailwind if you guys are familiar with button groups. Basically, like, you know, almost like a toggleable type of game mode thing. We're gonna have game mode 1, 2, and 3 that will be listed out here. So we're gonna make some buttons that will be clickable that will alter the game mode. This will be the current mode, our classic mode that we have going on right here. I guess C for classic, not that, whatever that thing is right there. C for classic. I'm, you know, drawing with the pen is really hard, y'all. I don't know what I'm gonna call this, so for now we'll label it as advanced or like cool kid mode or like super cool mode or I don't know, gamer mode, something stupid and ironic like that. But it'll be an advanced mode that's going to include those cooldowns that I talked about at the end of last video, where each player will have a cooldown that they can burn, for example, to keep the game interesting, like add some ability to overwrite spaces or to reverse the state of the board if you realize you done goofed up one time or something like that. And this will be for, you know, CA and AI or computer mode. I don't know what I'm going to call it. We'll figure it out. But basically, if they click on 3, this will make it so the human player will be X and the computer player will be O. And we'll have to make it so the human player can make a move and then after a fake deliberation time, the computer makes a move. And we'll have to make sure that the computer, I guess computer can be, you know, yellow now. But the point is, like, you know, we have to have the computer be able to make a move, prevent the player from spam clicking like crazy to try and keep making moves. And for now, like, I don't know how long, it'll probably take a while to code it all out and explain it, but what we're going to do for this video at the very least, and maybe discuss the steps to get to the next part, is from here, how does the computer know how to make a move? Well, it'll need to know when its turn is. We'll have to prevent the player from acting on the computer's turn by spam clicking like crazy. And we'll have to have some logic for the computer to follow. Now, eventually, I do want to get into making a computer look for any winning combos, any blocking combos, meaning right now the computer should technically prioritize this space to block the player from winning. We'll get to that when we get to that. Otherwise, all it needs to do is find any valid space and make a move there. That's what we're going to focus on today. So we're going to focus on the computer looking at all empty tiles, picking a random one, and making a move there. The most simple, fundamental tic-tac-toe AI we can possibly make. I mean, I say artificial intelligence. It's more like just random logic. But nevertheless, I'm not going to get into like trying to take screenshots or sending clips of our game state to, say, ChatGPT and having it stream a response back to us. That would require some back-end architecture, which I could set up and have this make requests to, but we're not going to get that far. If you have interest in that, maybe I can just do a standalone video of how to build that out with like a node backend that serves like a website front end that talks to it, et cetera, et cetera. If there's interest, get in the comments down below. Anyway, let's turn off my pen tool here. Epic Pen, shout outs to this freeware for Windows. It is a great tool for helping me do these lessons, whether it's on Discord calls with students or for YouTube video content like I'm making now. So, all right. I've talked about the goals and the pseudo logic of how we're going to work this. Again, have your jQuery cheat sheet handy in case you need it. If you don't have a lot of familiarity with jQuery, a lot of our alumni and students have a decent passing familiarity with it. They coded out a typing game in our course, which if you have interest in, check out the description down below for links to that as well if you want access to our course at various support levels. Okay. So first thing we're going to do is, like I said, let's go ahead and just add something simple, which is those game buttons up yonder. We have my game board, my rows, my container. Obviously, the buttons need to be in the container, but not inside the game board, as that styling and logic is kind of coupled together. So what I'm going to do here is we're going to add a new div, and we'll call it button group, like that. There'll be a button group class that will help me style these buttons. And what we're going to do inside of this is add 3 buttons as such with class button. Remember, the class button comes from one of my OG videos. I think the first or second one in this, no, third one in this. You think I would remember? The 5th video, Luke? My God, man. Okay, the 5th video in this series where I refactored this project for scalability and enhanced theming, where I added a main.css that all my pages will share that will have some core styling of the whole thing, which is where this class of button comes from. My God. All right, so we're going to call this the classic mode, and I'll have an identifier on this button as well that we're going to call mode-classic. This will give me an easy way to select the button with jQuery. To select the button with jQuery and have it do what I need it to do. So while we're here, I'll go ahead and just copy and paste that ID here. We'll call this one advanced or gamer mode or something. I don't know. We'll figure that out later. And this one we'll call mode computer or mode AI. I don't want to call it AI because it's not really an artificial intelligence. But, you know, whatever. We'll call this one advanced, and we'll call this one computer, so the text kind of lines up with their IDs, with their classes of buttons. That's all I need to do to make a little button group here. Now, there is no selector. If for anyone that's been going along this series with me so far, there's no button group in my main style sheet or my specific style sheet for this game. But it doesn't look too terrible, minus not being centered, so it's actually going to be very easy to just center the buttons and have what I would define as a button-styled group right there. But we can actually learn something new in the process and add some cool styling. And again, having a group of buttons that almost act kind of like toggles in my application here might be something I want to use across my code base. So I'm going to head to our main CSS file to begin making some adjustments to my button group and button classes and some things like that to make them more akin to what I imagine as that button group, what I drew with the pen tool earlier. So what we're going to do is add a selector for the button group class. Remember, this is in the main style sheet now because this is something I may want shared across my application. I need to make sure that I have control over those buttons. They're going to be in a horizontal alignment, so I'll just do a display flex and not change it to column. I'm going to hit him with a justify content center. Most of these things will probably be the same height, so I'm not going to do align items at the moment. I don't think I need to worry about that. And, you know, they may need some margin bottom. I'm not sure. I think there's enough space as of right now, so I would consider maybe adding margin bottom to the group itself. That way, that kind of is standalone content, but it's not that important. So that right there just centered everything inside the flex container for that button group. That got it all right, but as you can see, if I zoom in, the buttons look a little bit weird when they're stacked on each other like this with their own rounded corners here. So there's some overriding that we can do for our buttons. And I also need them to act kind of like a toggle of sorts in that one of these buttons should have an active state. So when you're looking at it and it's selected, for example, it should again, like, see that mouse over? Maybe that's what I want to do. When I mouse over the button with that hover pseudo selector, that background color change that happens to it, maybe I want that to stay there permanently should that button be considered quote unquote active. And there's a way we can actually do that fairly easily from both CSS and from our own class name. So what I'm going to do is say it will by default have an additional class name that we can add and remove that will signal not only in the DOM and to accessibility and screen readers that a certain button is active, but also allow us to give us some custom selecting ability to it inside of our CSS here. So as of right now, adding that active class name does nothing to said button in terms of styling it, but it does give us a whole lot new options we could do. So for example, I can say any button that has the active class name. So if you mouse over the selector, check it out. Element button active. I want to change its background color to be evaluated from our variable primary, not color, but light. If it's active, that right there, look at that. It already looks and feels kind of like a toggle. You know, and there's other things we could do, like we could keep the outline of the button or we can remove its outline when it's active so it kind of offsets it even more. If it had an outline to keep the design clean or something like that, because I think like when something is considered active or focused in the DOM, it has like an additional ring around it. So there's things you could do. I think that's what it does. Yeah. So it just messes with like that extra ring that appears around it when something is focused or highlighted, for example. It already has a white color text, but you could also choose to evaluate a different color text or change its text somehow to signify it's active. Like, for example, we could change its active text color so it's really obvious that it's selected. I don't think I have any crazy cool colors that I could use here. I don't know how secondary color would look. I think it might look pretty... Oh, because I forgot the semicolon. I mean, that ain't awful, but I'm not a fan of it. Yeah, we'll just leave it as just white for now. Just that FFF hex code right there. That's cool for now, and you can again, you can style however you want. I'm just giving y'all ideas. You don't have to follow exactly. You shouldn't follow exactly along with me. Add your own theme, add your own styles and colors, share them in code pens, or link your own repos down in the comments below. I want to see what y'all build if you divert from what I do. I really, really do, because I learn just as much from y'all when that happens. Other things you could do is you could do a pseudo selector called active, and I believe that active pseudo selector, yeah, is if a button is active, meaning there is focus on the button. No, not focus. I meant like when a user clicks down, like they use their primary mouse button to press down, is when that is considered active, or that activation state. So this pseudo class represents an element that someone's clicking on. That's what that active state is right there. So what we can do, for example, on ours, as always, is do even like a small transform. Again, nothing. You want to do this stuff where it's not crazy visible. A 0.75 is going to be pretty ridiculous, but let's see what that looks like. Right? Now that button being clicked is ludicrous in terms of its sizing. Right? That's pretty crazy looking and not very, well, smooth. So what we're going to do is we're going to make it very subtle, maybe like just 2% smaller than it currently is. So it has like a click effect to it, as you can see now, but it's not super, super crazy, right? So again, that's something that you can take into consideration for an active state on these buttons. When I press the button, it has that very subtle transform, so it's very obvious something's been clicked on visually. But again, you wouldn't notice that it has a transform scale on there, because we did our job right. We made it subtle enough to where we wouldn't notice it like we did with the 0.75, but it's there, and it does make a difference in terms of signaling to our user what's going on. Okay, so beyond the button code right there of the active class name, altering what it looks like if it's considered active, the pseudo selector of when a mouse clicks on it to give it a bit more tangible feeling to it, there's some cool stuff we could do. Because as of right now, I commented on how these don't look that good when they are spaced just on top of each other like this, but there's some cool things that we could actually do to adjust what this looks like. So watch this. I can say, hey, button group class name, find any button elements within. I mean, again, this selector, if you look at it, right, it looks for any element with class button group and an element inside of that with class button, which will probably always be our buttons. But there's actually some cool stuff we could do from there. We could add the first child set to it. So this will be the first button in the button group. Similarly, if I copy and paste this and change it from first child to last child, we now have the last button of the group, so we can actually mess with their borders in a way, right? We can kind of change what their borders look like. So I can say border top left radius is 10 pixels, or something more defined, so it looks almost like a pill style button. And we could do border bottom left radius. Let's go see what this does. So top left radius and bottom left radius. And you'll notice that the button now looks a little bit cooler or more rounded on the left-hand side when we're looking at our first child. All we have to do is repeat this on the opposite side for our last button. So I'll copy and paste those class names and change it from left to right-hand side. Now we have the buttons looking more like pills. From here, I would have to say all buttons in the middle, remove their border, or make it so they don't have that border on there. I don't mind it so much. I don't need them to be plastered against each other. So what we could also do is inside of button groups, button group, and specifically buttons inside the button group, I can add some margin between them. I can say 0 and like 5 pixels so they're not completely stacked on each other. And I kind of dig that for like a toggle, right? And you could always adjust the sizing as necessary. Remember, we are super zoomed in, so it looks larger than it actually is. That looks pretty decent for a little game mode toggle at the top here that clearly has one that is like highlighted or clicked in. So we would clearly have to write some code to handle the button clicks and change the active or remove the active class name off of the buttons and add it to the one we clicked on to signal to our users that they are being selected, right? So again, like there's a lot of different ways we could write this. This ain't exactly like how I drew it out, I know, but this is kind of still what I'm thinking we're going to kind of roll with for now. And again, you could do whatever you want. Again, I'm so used to using these like components from Daisy UI and Bootstrap and things like that trying to code them out myself makes me appreciate a lot more when I use a couple of class names, for example, like in Bootstrap, to make components quickly and easily. So remember, we added this to our main style sheet because this is something that we could feasibly use across our application pretty regularly for theming and, just general looking good. So now the real fun part is not just messing in the CSS. I may leave the HTML open in case I have to reference some of these button IDs to remember what they were. But the bulk of the video will be back over in our game.js logic because we got a lot to do. So I need to worry now about, first let's actually just go do what's it called. I'll go ahead and just write out how we're going to code out the button group click. Now, there's a couple different places I could run it. Again, I've shown y'all in the past where you could totally just run it here. I could have that button group selector where I delegate the button clicks inside of this, for example. This just runs when the IIFE runs, which is not a bad way to do it. I've been adding my, document ready, which again is not needed because I load my game.js at the bottom of the document body, but it just prevents things from being in the global scope of this file or the document itself if I'm loading different pages and not running into trouble by linking these JavaScript files. Again, I'm just trying to keep things not in the global scope wherever I possibly can to save myself a world of hurt. So we could have it when the game starts here. We can just say, hey, just like when they found the reset game button when the Tic Tac Toe game starts, I could also have my buttons found. I can say, hey, jQuery, find the buttons inside the button group. So again, this is not all buttons because remember, the reset game is a button class, which means I want to make sure that I use a more specific selector. Again, why I love, especially prior to query selector and query selector all, jQuery had this shorthand to make things a lot easier. But I'll go ahead and say in the buttons of the button group, let's bind a click listener to them, right? That runs the following code when they're clicked on. I'm going to console log the phrase here initially just to make sure we got it working the way I expected to. Console click, 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 you get 3, reset game, should not log a 4, and it doesn't. So there you go. We got to make sure that we do some testing. Again, you could write tests for all this stuff and whatnot, but you know what? Test-driven development? Nah, we're doing let's make it up as we go development. So we got our console log active and working no problem. We're going to say, hey, any button inside the button group. So again, say, hey, all buttons in the button group, go ahead and remove any active class. Because rather than just go through each button and see if they have the active class added to them, I'll just say, screw it. Every button inside the button group, I want it to remove the active class. Now, look at the classic button after I click on computer. It removed the active class name. So that part's done. Now the toggle is off and needs to switch to the one we just clicked on, which the button we clicked on is represented by the jQuery, hey jQuery, this, which again represents the button that is the event target of this function, of the click, of the event, right? And we're going to say add a class to that button. And remember, this has to be written after the removal of all active classes. It removes the one from the button that currently has it and adds it to the one we just clicked on. So that right there, Booyakasha, gives us a very easy way of toggling, as we can see, which button we have toggled here. So there you go. We now have the toggle feature ready to go, and we could add the logic here of figuring out which one we clicked on, but I'm going to give y'all an interesting way to solve this, which may not be my favorite, but it's going to work. So we have like the click function ready to go on each button, and I could read which button we clicked on via its ID, run like some if-else condition logic, meaning, again, inside of here, I could say some pseudo logic here. We could say, find ID of button we click on, and then run like a switch statement that says case ID is, I think it was like mode classic. We say start classic mode break, and then we would do case, again, this is pseudocode, so I don't know I'm adding syntax when it's not important. Mode, I think you can see where I'm going with this, right? Where we'd have to have like a statement for each possible ID of the button we clicked on. That's all fine and dandy. We could do it that way. Yeah, I'm just going to add an individual, I'm going to add just an individual button click for each one, or a capture for each one. So you're like, Luke, aren't you technically adding multiple clicks to each button at this point? Well, yeah, I'm just pointing out that's a fine way to do it if you want to do it that way. Again, it depends on your project needs and ability and what you know about adding multiple events to the same kind of element and having issues and whatnot. So, keep this in mind. I'm not saying this is the way you should do it, but because again, now I'm adding multiple clicks to elements, which can lead to a lot of headache if you're not careful, but it'll give me an isolated way of calling my tic-tac-toe game start function, which we're going to have to adjust as well, because I want to make sure I know what kind of game I'm starting, because this will be very important that we know which kind of game we are starting, because right now I can't just call start in all these like I currently am, because it's going to make a difference based on which one I click. But again, now I just went and made an individual listener for all the buttons to do some styling and an individual listener for logic, which again, you could make the argument that, yeah, the stacking of two different click event functions on one button is not a great idea. But I could also make the argument that having one click function that deals with the DOM manipulation and one click function that deals with the game logic has separation of concern. Again, I'm choosing to do it this way to point out that you have options and not to tell you that you should never ever do this. Again, at the end of the day, you want to learn, and sometimes the best way to learn is to cause a problem that you're going to have to fix later, unfortunately. It's like running face first into a brick wall. It's something you're just going to have to do. So how do I know what kind of game it is? We have a couple choices. We could do literally some kind of string value that I pass into the start functions from now on to signal to my initialize game function, which is what start is, what kind of game we're starting. But again, that will lead to trouble if I decide to do strings like that. And you're wondering, Luke, why did you capital case all those string values right there? That's just a common technique you will see in string values that are, well, constants. Classic game mode, advanced game mode, and AI or computer game mode. Those things are probably going to be used in if statements, in function arguments, as assigned values, in function parameters and arguments. It's going to be used everywhere. And as you saw at the beginning of this video, where I typoed the word visibility as visibility because it was a string with no typo indication or support, tells us that while this is a fine way of like these constants being capital string values like this, it signifies, hey, this is some like constant value that will be affecting the flow of my logic. Writing them as strings as such is not a great idea. What I should do instead is have some kind of variable that I could reference these properties on. So for example, I could have something called game mode and assign it that value as such, right? So if I did like game mode classic, I now have this variable. Now I know with hoisting and things like that and scope, don't worry about it. I know this is going to cause issues. I'm just pointing out this is how it would work a little bit nicer than the way I have it written currently, right? So now I have a variable, capital underscore case. It is a constant, some kind of key that will be integral in how the game logic works in conditions, in arguments, parameters, assigned values, etc., right? So this is a common thing. Anyone that has any experience from my React course, again, description down below if you have interest in getting access to Covalence's courses and our Discord community. This is a really common pattern you see in old Redux applications or anything that has a constant value. Like imagine like a tax calculator, you would have a tax rate that would be a constant value that you would have to use in several places potentially. So you probably assign it to a variable like this instead of writing 10% everywhere. Same way where I don't want to write classic in a string value over and over again. The ability to typo that is high. But now I have a variable that if I typo it, it'll let me know there's an error that I have and not just me having to go back and double check that I wrote everything correctly. But should I make it a global scope variable? Well, probably not. Y'all, I already told y'all that I don't want to pollute the global namespace if I can help it, right? So probably not a great idea to do it that way. That's why I'm not going to make it as a global above the Tic Tac Toe game, but we already know that if I make it scoped into the Tic Tac Toe game, IIFE, we're going to have some issues, right? Because I also don't want someone to be able to change it. Meaning, if I make an object, we're going to call it game mode, there'll be an object that will have you guessed it, keys that correspond to the type of game we are playing based on the button we click and its toggle. Right, so we have classic advanced computer as a game mode object now. We can now use it, for example, somewhere within this code if we wanted to. So if I'm going to add a variable that can help me toggle what current mode we're playing is, so we'll say current mode is defaulting to game mode dot classic right there. So it by default starts as a classic game mode. There is me accessing game mode classic, that object with that property and that string value, into a current mode variable that can allow me to alter how the game is going to play. Right? So that's one way to do it, but as you know, if I want to access that game mode outside of here now, I cannot, because it is scoped within the IIFE itself for good reason. I also want to make sure that a user doesn't have access to modify it, right? So at the moment, I could expose this to the public API, something we haven't touched since the very first video we did here. I could do game, and again, this is a shorthand technique in ES6 JavaScript that allows me to do the following. If I make up a key or property of an object and its value is a variable that has the exact same name, I don't need to have the redundant key colon variable be the same thing. So it doesn't have to be key colon key. It can just be shorthanded down to the following. A very common trick you'll see me do a lot. And common practice and pattern is to have your shorthands at the top of an object and your non-shorthands below that. That's a common pattern you will see. So now I have game mode available on Tic Tac Toe, if I'm not mistaken. So I should, for example, be able to reference it down yonder in my off of my public API for the Tic Tac Toe game. So I should have Tic Tac Toe game dot game mode dot, well, not classic. It'd be, Tic Tac Toe. Here we go, mode classic. Tic Tac Toe game dot game mode dot classic. Boom, I have access to that object over here in my code. So now I can pass in a parameter to my start, which we haven't adjusted yet, to actually start the game on different modes. Let me go ahead and finish writing that out. This one would be game mode dot advanced arena, and then down yonder for computer mode, we'll have tic tac toe game dot game mode dot computer. And so, yes, there's a little extra work. You might say that readability can suffer a little bit when doing this particular way of making an object with properties to help us do string value stuff. But again, it gives us a way of now quickly adding additional modes. If I need to change the value of a key from the word classic to classico for no real reason, I can choose to do that without breaking all of my game logic. I have a single source of truth for what these values are, which means they're a lot easier to modify and to look at in the scope of this game. Now, I don't think it's available, so tic-tac-toe game is right there, which means I have access to game mode, which means I could technically take classic and I could reassign it to the string value of poop LOL, and I believe that'll be a valid piece of JavaScript code. Yeah, so, okay, right now we have an issue. I have exposed in the public API access to the game mode property of my tic-tac-toe game. This means that a user could totally come in here and start messing with these properties, like myself or my coworker Andrew, or particularly malicious users on websites, especially our students' labs, because it's fun. It's fun breaking things and making it a teaching lesson, and fun for me and him to find out our own ability to be, good little boy hackers, little white hat hackers, right? So, we have a lot of fun doing that with our students' labs and getting trolled by our students' labs and in turn trolling them back. But yeah, this right here would be the easiest way to troll somebody because I've already managed to break something and I can begin finding out what I can of this game by inspecting the source JavaScript code and all that stuff and seeing what is available in the global scope. And I told y'all I don't want to pollute that and mess with it now because that's going to cause some issues if I'm not careful. Now, because I made it so classic, the property is going to be used instead of its value, I do have some safety in that they can reassign the classic mode property on the game mode object all they want. And as long as I'm still referencing in my code game mode classic, and not the string classic, then reassigning this value is not going to break anything, thankfully. So automatically, we have made it so the easiest of script kiddie hackers can't break our application by simply adjusting a property name. Now, what could destroy this, however, is running the following, because now if they run game mode classic, it's undefined, and that is probably going to cause some issues. So what I did right there is I simply used the delete keyword, as you can see, to delete a property off of my game mode object, which means anything that references Tic Tac Toe game or game mode classic is now basically screwed. Now, this is a problem, so we're going to have to change how this code works. We need to make sure it's immutable, meaning it cannot be modified, it can't be added, modified, or removed. We need to have some level of data integrity and security, some performance optimization, some cloning safety, compatibility, and we can do all that in two different ways, which I'm going to show you right now. With an object, I have a cheesy way of dealing with this. Watch this. That's it, folks. This is the easiest and cheesiest way of making sure we make our objects immutable. For anyone that knows that term, remember from my React course, I talk about this a lot. This is a really cheesy way of just making sure an object remains immutable. So now that I've done that, will it allow me to read it? Yes, it does. Will it allow me to delete it? I got a false. And guess what? I can no longer delete that property and break the state of the game. I can also, hopefully that didn't work. Okay, good. I can also, as you can see, I could attempt to assign poop LOL. I know, I'm 37, very mature. And attempt to assign that to that object, and it does not assign. Because like I said, we made this whole thing immutable with this one little trick that script kiddies hate, object.freeze. So I wanted to go through all of that discussion just to show y'all the object.freeze property and how it could really give us a new way of handling this problem. Okay, so cruising on along, we have current player, current mode. We're also going to have a new variable called allow cell click. I want to make sure that the cell click feature is turned off temporarily while our computer makes its move. Again, I don't want a user just spam clicking everywhere before a computer finishes deciding its move, because we're going to give it a fake timer, a set timeout, to make sure it looks like it deliberates for half a second before it places the move. But I also want to make sure that players aren't clicking like crazy while the computer takes the half second to think of its next move. So we're going to have a variable to help prevent that being an issue. So remember down yonder on my various button clicks, I have my game modes being passed into the start function, and also two instances where start doesn't have a game mode passed in. I have a couple different ways I could choose to do this. I could choose to pass in the game mode as a requirement for start in all these locations, or I could use a default parameter. The choice is up to you. So, because I only have two locations, it would be easy to add classic into, well, reset actually would need to know which one's currently clicked and not just go back to classic, because reset game should reset on the one we currently have active. So that'll be interesting to talk about. This one will have to be the classic game mode to default start the game. I'm going to choose to do it up yonder as a default parameter in here. I'm going to call this parameter selected game mode. And if it's not passed in, I'm going to have it default to the classic game mode. That should be a assignment instead of a hyphen. So it will default if not provided. So over here in my current reset and my current Tic Tac Toe game start on page load or DOM content loaded, it will start as classic game mode, no problem. On reset games, when I pass in or click a button at the top in my button group, if I click on the computer game mode, it should, as y'all guessed, set the current mode as the selected one that is passed in and not default to classic, right? So on resets, they should also have current mode be selectable via passing in a parameter. And if not, it should default to game mode classic. Again, I chose to do it this way just because I could. Righto. So the other thing we have to keep in mind about this game mode is the reset button, right? So I don't have like an easy way to showcase Tic Tac Toe because I'm not exposing. My God, Luke, I hit enter when I do this a lot. There we go. Yeah, so at the moment, this are my only two things exposed on my public API, but the reset button is going to need to know what our current game mode is. And I do have an internal variable for that called current mode, because we assign that on initialize, and again, we also assign it on initial value here. Same argument from a previous video where, hey, Luke, you assign game mode classic first thing to current mode and initialize game, so why initialize current mode with the value up here? Again, I just choose to. I don't need to. I could use null right here, but again, I'm going to choose to assign it a value since I have access to it. The point being, this reset button needs to know what our current game mode is to restart that. So if I'm on advanced mode and not classic, and I click reset, it shouldn't go back to classic, which right now it would, because I click reset, I passed in no parameter to start. If I pass in no parameter, it defaults to classic mode. So I need to have a way of knowing what our current game mode is so I can restart the current game mode and not default. So I could do a DOM read where I can say go to the DOM and read what current button has the active class on it to go find that, but the fact is that there could be other things in the DOM with the class active. I could go to the button group, find all buttons, find the button that has the active class name, etc. But again, like, we've been tracking the state of the game from JavaScript here and not what's relying on the DOM, right? Like, I haven't said, go find something in the DOM to read the state of the game. I've been using everything as internally as I possibly can, or rather into game JavaScript, and not saying, hey, read the DOM to find out where the empty cells are if somebody's one, or read the DOM for a button's active class list to see if that's the kind of game we're starting. I'm kind of got this decoupled from the DOM logic in that way. The DOM is just a rendered of what my game code is and not the other way around. But there's, you could do it the other way around if you wanted to. But like I was saying, we need to worry about something called getters and setters, which is a common thing you see in what's it called? In OOP, object-oriented programming versus functional programming, like I've chosen to do here. Think of them, getters and setters are a term you should know even as a newbie. That way when you move into more intermediate level coding or bigger code bases or even more old school code bases, especially like C++ or Java or something like that, you don't want, this is what we did for the object freeze technique we did on the game mode before we pass it into our public API here. They are used to provide controlled access to object properties. So this is basically a getter only because I wrapped it in the object freeze. It allows for the encapsulation of property access, providing a level of abstraction over how data is accessed or modified, right? So you're going to think of it as a window through which we can either view the contents of a room or property like game mode, but I cannot directly interact with anything inside the room, right? I can only look into the room. That's what Object Freeze did for us on game mode. Similarly, setters are a door instead of a window that you can modify the contents of the room, but you can't see directly what's inside. So a setter allows me to set a value and not get what it is. And a getter allows me to look into the room to see what stuff is. So I know the argument for this analogy kind of falls flat because, if there's a door to go mess with things in the room, you could see what's inside the room. But imagine you can't see what's in the room. You can only go put things inside, but you can only see the room through the window. Maybe you have like blinders on when you walk through the door. Like it's dark, so you can't see anything, so you can set something down. But if you go to the window, there's a light shining through the window that you could see into the room with. Not the best analogy, but I'm trying to get a point across here. Setters walk through a door and set stuff, but you can't read. Getters look through a window to see stuff, but you can't set stuff. So that gives you a controlled way of messing with data. And in our case here, like I said, it gives us security, encapsulation, which you're going to think of as the term as, it hides implementation details, only exposing what's necessary. The same reason I have everything wrapped in an IIFE and exposing only certain things that you could read or invoke to start the game, but nothing else that can mess with the internal game logic, so script kiddies can't break our game almost immediately. So, getters and setters in OOP are often like class methods used to access, to read or set properties, right? Very common in Java and C++. and we're kind of implementing our own simple version of them here. It's good for y'all to know regardless of your skill level. So we can actually write our own getter for this public API that will return to us the current game mode that will allow us to expose it into the global scope of our Tic Tac Toe game to use within our reset game function instead of having to read the DOM. A lot of work for a lot of learning and a big payoff. We're going to make a property called getCurrentMode. It is going to be a property on our public API that will be a function that only returns the value of current mode. So because current mode is simply a string value assignment, we can return a copy of that string value that makes sure someone cannot change the current mode away from what current button is clicked on. So this is a getter. Returns the value of that string of current mode, the value of the variable, that only allows us to read it. It allows us to look into the room, but not set what it is, because again, the tic-tac-toe game start on button clicks is what sets what it is. But now I have the ability to do tic-tac-toe game.getCurrentMode function, and I simply invoke that on my reset game, so it restarts the game on whatever the current mode is, right? So current mode is classic. I can run tic-tac-toe game.getCurrent mode parentheses, and it returns classic. I click on advanced, run the same code, I get advanced. Click on a computer, run the same code, I get computer. This is, I'm clapping so I don't clip the microphone level anymore. There you go. That is a really cool lesson to learn about getters and setters in coding, and especially in a non-OOP environment like we're doing right now. All right, so all this crap should be just about out of the way before I move into the actual fun part of how do we actually make a computer play this game. So the next big portion of our code is going to happen inside of make move. Make move is for the most part going to run the exact same way. It's still going to check to see if there's a winner. It doesn't care who made the move. It just checks to see if that individual won the move. Same thing for the draw. If all cells are taken up or not empty was how our check draw worked, then it's a draw no matter what the occasion is, no matter computer or human made the move. Down here simply toggles the move for the next player. And this is where we're going to implement our logic. We need to say, hey, if it's time to play computer style, we're going to have our AI make its logical move, and then we let the game toggle once again for the next current player, right? So here's how we're going to do this. First things first. I'm going to add a condition up yonder and change how this is written. So at the moment, I have it all nested in this if condition, which is getting kind of nasty, and I'm going to have more early escapes. So what I want to do is remove those curly braces from around my code and format. So there we go. Now the if else exists outside of any other condition. This if statement up here, it moved that line of code up, it shouldn't do that. This if statement up here is going to do a stop. We're going to simply reverse this logic to say, hey, if that spot is not empty, that means it is taken. They are trying to cheat. Stop early. This is our anti-cheat with reverse logic. So instead of saying if it's empty, play the game, we're saying if it's not empty, stop the game. Now we're also going to say, hey, remember our allow cell click variable? Or if allow cell click is saying, hey, we're stopping a player from making a move right now because the computer is doing the move and I don't want them spam clicking, allow cell click the toggling of it from true to false and back to false again, for example, or back to true again. That is also going to dictate when a player can and can't make a move. So we're going to have a very first line check inside of make move saying, hey, computer's currently making a move, aka allow cell click is false. Therefore, do not let them click the game. You can do an ES6 shorthand where you can drop the curly braces, move the keyword, return directly after the parentheses, and that is a shorthand of the exact same thing I had written with curly braces. And I know some of y'all with previous experience in coding probably don't like that kind of shorthand. I dig it for early returns in JavaScript, and it functionally is the exact same thing. A one-line implicit return on these if statements here, or one-line code block of if statements. You could drop the curly braces. And in our case, it's a return keyword to stop cheating. So let's make sure in classic mode, you still can't overwrite players. It still works the exact same way. I'm spam clicking all these cells, and it's not overwriting the move because my early return shorthand is correctly working. Let's see if I toggle it from an initialized true to an initialized false, I can't even play the game at all now. So we know it's working when that value is false. Let's change it back to true so we can keep on going down this logic. Like I said, check win and check draw are going to not change. So I'm going to collapse them for readability. Now, we need to say, how do we know if it's time to implement computer logic or just play the game as normal? So this is the game as normal. We'll only take an additional step if it's time for computer time. So how do we know that? Well, we have our internal current mode variable and a property that we could reference to say, hey, if it's computer mode time selected, if our current mode is computer mode, if those are a direct comparison, and we're going to default the computer to be O, we can say if the current player is O, which this also might indicate to y'all, hey, Luke, wouldn't you want a game player object down here that you could standardize how X's and O's are referenced in the game? You sure could. I might do that in a future video for optimization. So we're saying, hey, if it's currently computer mode and it's not X, because remember, X is the player turn. X should just do this and set up for O. Then this will play O and toggle it back to X and then not do this because it's X's turn. So X's are humans, O's are computers in this particular case. So this is our condition to know when it is computer game mode, because computer game mode, only on turn O will it do what we're about to do. So what does it need to do is it needs to first turn off the ability for users to start clicking again. So let's see if this works correctly, right? So on classic mode, I can toggle between them no problem. On advanced mode, I click X. And, oh, that's advanced mode. I meant computer mode, y'all. On computer mode, I cannot go to O because O will be the computer's turn right now. So we already have the basic logic going for the game saying, hey, once I make a move right now, the computer's thinking and hasn't played yet and means I can't play either. So we have that part figured out. I want the computer to spend a little bit of time here. Let's do an arrow function, screw it. We'll say the computer needs to spend like half a second making a decision. We'll say comp move like that. So the computer makes a move. After half a second passes, computer mode X comp move. Now click again, comp move, right? So yeah, I mean, we have it pretty much working the way we expect. All I need to do now is instead of console logging computer move, comp move, I'm going to make an actual function for the computer to make its move. We're going to call it make computer move, and it's going to be some code to run in this timeout, right? And make the decision of how to make a move, and then also allowing and then once it makes the move, giving the player the ability to give the cell click back to the player. So there's a couple different ways we could do that, and there's going to be some implications of where we toggle allow cell click back on to B based on how this code runs. So yeah, what I want to do is say the following. How does a computer know how it can make a move? Remember, if I click here, the computer has to know that it can't place an O there. So right now, like I said, we're keeping the logic simple. We are not making a smart AI. It's already 53 minutes in. I'm not doing that. But maybe in the next video. No, for sure in the next video, because I want to do it. So for now, our simple implementation will be loop through all available cells, find it all, and catalog which cells are empty. Because remember, I could have a really weird... Oh, because I didn't toggle the value back, did I? Interesting. I'll have to remember to toggle... Oh, yeah. Well, I'll have it toggled off for allow cell click. So yeah, we'll fix that later. But so when I went to computer and back to classic, remember resetting back to classic doesn't turn back on my computer move thing. This is why I got stuck. We'll fix that later. But if this is the state of my game board, the computer would have to go through these empty cells, catalog which cells are currently empty so it knows which one it could safely make a move into. And for now, that's all we're going to do. Catalog and find all empty cells. From that list of empty cells it's cataloged, make a move at random. And that's it. That's all we're going to have to do. This is the simplest way we can implement this. So first things first, we need to catalog the empty cells. I can't think of a better way than having our good old friend, the array, be a value. So we're going to say, hey, we'll just list all possible moves, aka all empty cells after we find them, into this array. To get all empty cells, we're going to do some trickery with some nested for loops. So I have a for loop that's going to go through every possible x value or row value. So we're going to have x equals 0 as long as x is less than 3, increment x by 1 each iteration. Then we're going to go through each possible column represented by the iterator y, starting at 0, y is less than 3, y plus plus. So again, this is a classic nested for loop. Remember, its sole purpose is to go through each row and each column in this nested loop structure. So it would do what? It would go initial, let's say initial value x 0, y 0 is the first one it would check. Then the inner loop would go from y0 to y1 while x stays the same. The outer loop hasn't ticked yet. The inner loop then goes to y equals 2 by y plus plus, right? Then it makes a determination that y becomes 3, which means the inner loop stops, and the outer loop then ticks to 1, and then the inner loop resets back to y0. And as you can see, this is how it would just continue on until it got every row and every column. So we're just systematically going through every row and every column or every cell of the game with this nested for loop structure. And we're going to say we only care if the cells are empty. So we're going to say if in this structure, if our current board variable x and y positions based on this loop here has an empty string, because remember, our board is a bunch of empty strings initially, we're going to say, hey, that's an empty cell, which means it's going to be a valid way of playing the game. So I'm going to push them in as an object using that same shorthand I showed y'all earlier. It is akin to writing the following x colon x comma y colon y, but we can shorthand it down to just x comma y. That gives us all empty cells as we play the game with a coordinate object inside. I can loop, or rather log, the empty cells array when the computer makes a move. Let's see if this works just fine. And you know what? After we console log it, we'll toggle allow cell click back to true so the player can click again. Let's go check this out. Okay, the computer just calculated all available empty spaces, right? So as long as I keep going through the game, the available empty spaces get smaller and smaller, because remember, it's finding them. So yeah, 0, 2, row 2, cell column 0, column 1, and column 2 inside of row 2. So yeah, we have those 4 available spaces left right there. So rather than just console logging it, how do we determine if the computer can make a move? Well, obviously, if empty cells has a length that's greater than 0, which should never be the case, because or it should never be equal to 0 or less than 0. Obviously, the length will never be a negative number unless we really mess up our array. But the length should never get to 0 because check draw should theoretically prevent us from ever getting down to this game check anyway. But again, it's nice to have some additional if statements in here to make sure that something can't really go wrong. Next, we need to calculate a random cell to make a move into. So we need to look into our empty cells array and just pick a random position. All we gotta do is pick a random index position that is available. Well, we need to pick a random index position that is an available move. So if our array has 4 index positions, 0 through 3, like let's say we have 4 empty cells available on this particular round of game logic. I gotta pick a random number from 0, 1, 2, or 3 for the array positions of my empty cells. Now, picking a random value from our empty cells array is actually kind of simple. I'm going to do, inside of the square bracket notation of index position, a math.floor to make sure that we basically floor the number or return the greatest integer from rounding down, basically. A math.floor of the following calculation. Take a math.random and multiply it by the length of your array. This is a classic trick a lot of our students learn in the Dom lab. For any of my alumni watching this video, that's where you did this trick where you had to get like a random color from an array of colors, for example. This is the same trick you learned, right? So that gives us an empty cell, which remember, our cell is represented by an XY object combo. So I'm going to say random cell is right there, console log random cell, and allow click back to true. So basically, I'm making sure I'm going to console log a available cell once the computer's turn is up. Look, it randomly picked 2, 1. So row 2, column 1. So the computer would draw here. Then I'm going to say, hey, I'm going to pick the middle now. The computer drew 2, 2. So the computer picked row 2, column 2. Oh, it blocked me. That was by sheer happenstance, everybody. Then I'm going to say, I'm going to go here, and I got the computer, because now it has to draw either here or here to block me, and it's lost. So it picked 0, 1, so that's 0, 1. It picked there, I pick here, I won. So as we can see, I beat the computer because the computer is just literally making random moves that should have tried blocking me sooner. But okay. Now we see that it's correctly picking random cells, so all I'm going to do is ask it to make a move. But Luke, for make move, the function, you're calling it from over here. Yeah, but remember, this is not going to be an infinite call, a recursive call. It is a recursive call, and that make move calls make computer move, that calls make move. But remember, so long as the game mode is computer and the current player is O, which should be toggled before that if statement runs every time, it will have a terminating condition, right? This will prevent an infinite recursive loop from happening, right? This is our terminating condition. Now, we have another issue. If I call make move before allowing a click to be true, I have an issue where I will prevent the computer from making a move by my own logic. This is where I said it really depends on how we do this. If we later change how the computer draws a move on there, or if our render is like an animation, I will have a lot of asynchronous code to worry about. But because it's currently synchronous, I have to toggle that back to true to allow the computer to make a move, which means technically if a user is spam clicking absolutely fast, they could theoretically get around this problem. So for now, I'm going to call allow click, or rather assign allow click true only by the time the computer makes a move, because that action is a synchronous drawing of make move. By the time it gets here, I should be able to not see the results of spam clicking something. But the important part is, remember, make move takes 3 parameters: the XY coordinates and what cell it's clicking on. So watch this. Random cell, remember, was an object when I console logged it, right? Random cell is an object. So if random cell is an object with properties X and Y, the X will be the random cell X property, the random cell Y property are my X's and my Y's. As for what the parameter for the cell itself will be, I will say, hey jQuery, I want to move this to new lines for readability. Hey jQuery, I need you to find the following template literal, the cell that has the following data properties. So this is a valid CSS selector that will look for a cell that has 2 specific data attributes that match my X and Y. So if my X and Y are 1, 2, I got to find data X1, data Y2. And if I can match those 2 together, that's the cell that we are clicking on. So how do we find that? This right here. The square brackets inside of a CSS selector are attribute selectors. We can go see this in our CSS file. I can say cell data X, right? So this, if we mouse over the selector, says find any element with class cell and attribute data-x without caring what its value is. I could do different kinds of values, a strict value or a matching value. I can say, hey, find a value that matches this kind. I can do a lot of weird things with my data or attribute selectors. This attribute selector could also be theoretically done as the following. I could say, as my selector, because class is an attribute with a value of cell. So as you can see, I could write all my attributes inside of square brackets if I was a psychopath, but I'm not going to. Because class and ID are very commonly used. They have a standard they follow in terms of notation, but data is one we just make up. So the attribute selector with square brackets in combination with the custom names I gave of data is how this is going to work. This one represents data X. This one represents data Y. But I don't want just all cells that have data X, data Y, because that's all of them. I want them to specifically have a value that matches the following. So the double quotes around my interpolation right there, zoom in, are very important. The double quotes around my I'm interpolating is very important. Random cell dot x for the value. Same thing over here. Data dash y equals, set of double quotes. Inside the double quotes, interpolate random cell dot y. And everyone just saw my cat Percival's tail flash on the screen. Percy, come say hi. Come here. It's Percy. It's Percival DeRollo, my kitty cat, my tuxedo. Say hi, Percy. Cool. He's going to probably be wandering around the desk because he comes up wanting attention. When I give it to him, he runs off. So we have our selector now set up for which cell we are clicking on, the X and Y position. So I think we are now good to go. That is it. That is how this found all empty cells, randomly picked an empty cell, made sure it could make its own move, and at the same time preventing us from spam clicking while it decides. Then it makes its own move, and remember, once this toggles back to X, it won't recursively call itself over and over and over again because it only works on O's. So we should be there, folks. There we go. We now have, well, again, I could just beat it right there. Reset game should keep it on computer mode, which I believe it does. It does. You know what? Let's let the O win. It doesn't want to win for some reason. So it has 2 spots. If I pick this spot, it has 2 spots it can win in. There we go. The computer won. I lost to the computer. All right, so that ends it for this video. As always, do all the YouTube stuff. Like this video. Leave a comment down below to boost us in that algorithm. Subscribe to our channel. Hit that bell notification to make sure you get all our awesome little videos here. Me, Andrew, and Matt at Covalence. Love making these videos. We have a treasure trove of them. If you search through our playlists and our video history and titles, you'll find a crap ton of stuff that's really useful to you. I'm going to continue this series. Again, use the links in the description down below for the up-to-date README in the repository and the latest commit to look at it here. Get your jQuery cheat sheets ready to go, where you can see, by the way, this is how you could do different kinds of matches on CSS attribute selectors, where you could find containing a given, like any attribute that contains a given substring, which I think is crazy. There's so much cool stuff you could do with them. I did a direct value in my data attribute selector right here. It had to have that 0 and that 1, for example. It has to match them. So yeah, we got it working, y'all. I can't believe we got that far in this video. The next video, I'm going to see, it might take some time, but there is a way we could take and modify this or make one called Make Smart Computer Move, just so we have both for posterity, of how we can make the computer not only find the empty cells, but prioritize certain moves, which would be the next part of it. It would need to prioritize if it's going to win or if it needs to block me. So first it'd be, hey, can I block the X player or Luke's turn from winning? If that's not the case, do I have a winning move I could prioritize? If that's not the case, then just go back to making a random move. So hey, we could now combine even more moves into make move and make computer move and make smart computer move. Then the next video will probably be covering what we could do for advanced, where I said I want to have a game mode for 2 players that has cooldowns to burn, almost like it's like a more like multiplayer style game with like modern features you would expect. So yeah, and guess what? It'll all be for free. No DLC prices here. No store or microtransactions you have to worry about. So yeah, like I said, do the YouTube stuff. Have fun with this project. Hope you're enjoying it as much as I am, and I'll see y'all in the next one.